Hey, this is Anjali, and today we are going to do arrays. Before starting this, I assume that you have a basic knowledge of programming and you know what variables are in C language. So now when we come to arrays, first of all, why do we need arrays and what are arrays? Arrays are basically something where you need to store multiple values in the same name and those values must be of the same data type. Why do we need these arrays? Because if I have to store multiple values, I have to store marks of 10 students. Without arrays, I have to take 10 different variables. Like I have to take one variable for storing marks of first student, let's say M1, then M2, M3, M4, and so on. So the program code will become longer and will be difficult to manage. So whenever you have to work on values of similar data type and there are a number of values, we always prefer using arrays instead of using independent variables. So we can define arrays as a collection of multiple elements of same data type under a single variable name. So you have multiple elements, they all are stored under a single variable name, but there is a restriction in C and C++ that they must be of the same data type. So if the first one is an integer, rest all of them have to be integers. If they're float, then all of them have to be float. So they must follow the same data type. Now, since the name is same, how would you identify different elements in the array? For that, we have their position or subscript. So individual elements are assessed using their position in the array, also called as index or subscript. That's why in some languages, arrays are also called as indexed variables or subscripted variables. Usually the position starts from 0 in most of the languages. In C and C++, it starts from 0. That means the 0 position is the first element, then 1 is the second element, and so on. It goes up to the maximum size -1. So if I have declared an array of size 5 and the name is, let's say, M, so M0 will be my first number, then M1, M2, M3, M4 will be the last position. And as per the memory, they are stored in contiguous memory locations. Now, what do we mean by this contiguous memory locations? Say I have taken an integer array of size 10. So if my compiler is taking 2 bytes for an integer, it will take 20 bytes for the array. And those 20 bytes cannot be allocated in the memory at different positions in parts. Like it is not possible that 12 bytes are allocated somewhere else and 8 bytes are allocated somewhere else. So 20 bytes have to be in one go. So if my first element of the array is at address 200, so my memory allocated for the array will be from 200 to 220. Last element will be at 218. So this is how the memory is allocated for arrays, but it has nothing to do with the programming as such because the basic programs will work in the normal way. Then is where do you apply arrays? Okay, these are arrays, but where are we going to use it? So arrays are used whenever you have to work with multiple values of similar data type. One of the example could be like we discussed marks of a student. So if I have to take marks of 20 students and I have to check which grade they are getting as per their marks. So instead of taking separate variables, I can take an array for that. Similarly, if I have to work for salaries of employees, I have to make an address book where I should have number of names and phone numbers of different people. So whenever we need to work on multiple values of same data type, we are going to use arrays for that. Okay, now how to use arrays? How do you declare an array? Array declaration consists of the data type, like which type of value you're going to store. Here, obviously, we're going to write the keyword, which will tell which data type we want. Then you have to give an array name, which should be a valid identifier. And in square brackets, we have to give the size of the array, the maximum size. So if I'm giving size 5, I'll have numbers from position 0 to 4. So data type can be anything, then you have name and then the maximum size. That's how we declare the array. Now, how would you process it? Obviously, we've just discussed that elements can be accessed as A0 is the first element, A1 is the second element. If my array is A, then A4 will be the last element. If the array's name is age, then you have to use age 0, age 1, age, and so on. So if I have to input all the elements in the array, I don't have to scan each and every element. I don't have to write scanf percentage d, percentage d, percentage d, percentage d, percentage d 5 times and then I'd have to write ampersand A0, A1. No, I don't have to write that. I can use a loop for that. So loops are very useful when you have to process arrays. Whenever I have to work on the complete array, I use a loop from the position from where I have to start to the position where I have to end. Like this loop goes from 0 to 5. So for I is equal to 0, I less than 5, I plus plus, and I have entered the value in AI. So when I is 0, I less than 5 is true, it will input an integer that would get stored at A0. Then I becomes 1, second integer goes at A1, then A2, A3, A4. And at 5 the condition becomes false, so we terminate the loop. So that's how with these two lines only you can input an array of 5 elements, 50 elements, or even 500 elements. So you just need to change the index over here. Instead of 5, write the final position till where you have to go. So loops makes array processing a lot simpler and easier. Now before we go to the array initialization thing, let me show you where and how we use arrays. So this is our C++ screen. This is Turbo. Here I have written a code which is basically to input any 5 numbers and to print the same numbers. But as you can see, there is no array used in this code. So I have taken two variables n and a. I'm asking for inputting the numbers. The loop goes from 0 to 5 and it enters 5 numbers. Then we are showing those numbers. Now let's execute this code. Once I execute the code, it's going to ask me for the 5 numbers. I enter 78, 45, 90, 35, or whatever you want. The last number I've entered is 60. I obviously expect that it should print these 5 numbers which I have entered, but you can see what happens. It shows 60, 60, 60, 60 all 5 times. Why? Because 60 was the last number we entered. Since n is a single variable out here, when I enter 78, it gets stored in n. But as I enter 45, there is no more space in n. 78 gets overwritten and I get 45 in that. When I write 90, 45 is gone, 90 comes in n. Same way 35, and the last value which goes in n is 60. Then that loop gets over. When the next loop starts, it prints the value of n 5 times, and the value of n does not change, it's 60. So it prints 65 times on the screen. But I don't want this kind of result. I wanted that I should enter 5 different values and all those different values should be printed on the screen. For that, you can see what change I'm making. I've done n5, and over here I've done in scanf ampersand na, and in printf I've done na. Now the processing would be like this. Here earlier only 4 bytes were allocated to my program because 2 bytes for n, 2 for a, but now it will be 12 bytes. 10 bytes for n since there are 5 integers and 2 bytes for a. Now when a starts from 0, it inputs a value but that gets stored at n0. Then a becomes 1, another integer is entered but that gets stored at n1. Then n2, n3, n4. All values are stored at different positions, so nothing is overwritten. Once the loop is over, this one works, entered numbers are, this loop again starts from 0 and it prints the value of n0. n0 is the first number which we entered, then it prints n1, n2, n3 and n4. So none of the values are overwritten, all are saved at their own positions, and that's why when we print, we get all those numbers as per their position. So you can see I'm getting the same numbers which I entered, all 5 different numbers. So that's how arrays can be used for processing numbers or any other data type you have. So now array initialization. So this was how we declared array, inputted it and printed it. But you can initialize a variable also. Initialization means the moment you declare it, you want to put a value in it. If I have declared an array and I have not given any value, it by default has garbage values. Garbage values means anything would be there, any value which is of no use to me. So now if you have to initialize, you write the data type, you write the name, the size of the array, and then we give the values in the curly brackets separated by commas, and at the end you have a semicolon. For example, I write int a5 is equal to 60, 30, 50, 40, 35. So here 60 will go to a0, then a1, a2, a3, a4 respectively. So in case your size is bigger, like I've given a10, but I have given only 5 values. So rest of the values will be automatically initialized to 0. But you can't do this that the size is small and you give more values. Like if I would have given A3 and I give 5 values here, I'll get an error for that. So that's not possible. So this is a sample program where we input 5 numbers in an array and we find their sum. The earlier one which you saw was just inputting 5 numbers and printing it. Here I've declared an array A5, I is for the index and sum we've taken as 0 initially. Then we ask enter the numbers. Numbers are entered with the help of a for loop. Then I take the loop again to print the numbers as well as this line sum plus equal to AI finds the sum. So initially I is 0, A0 is added in the sum, then A1 is added, A2, A3, A4 and after the loop is over we print the final value of sum. So this is how we make a very basic program in C for arrays. If you have to do the same thing in C++, the only thing that will change is instead of printf, you will be using cout, and instead of scanf, you will be using cin. Otherwise, the concept of arrays is same in C and C++. I hope you understood what arrays are and why they are used. I'll be coming I'll be coming up with more programs of arrays so that you can understand its usage in a better way. In case of any doubts, do write in the comment section. Thank you.